2, 2.
No. Next page. Uh, that's me.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Oh, it's still morning? I thought I saw 12.
Say that again.
Still morning? I thought I saw 12.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
it's this,
Yeah, this is
sorry,
me.
it's
Don't
still
worry.
morning. Okay. Okay, so our first keynote for today will be taken by AIDEEN Barry,
Yes.
and the topic
Oh, I'll
is-
read the topic out if
Okay,
you want. Don't
yeah,
worry.
okay,
Don't
yeah.
feel it's a
Okay, so-
mouthful.
enjoy.
Hello all. Can you all hear me? Yeah? You can all hear me? Hi, my name is AIDEEN Barry and I'm a visual artist. I'm from Ireland, originally from Cork, but I actually lived in Galway for 15 years and did my 2 degrees in Galway in fine art here. So I'm going to kind of introduce, the topic is visual fictions, interpreting heritage through social engaged cultural co-production. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll try and explain a little bit about who I am and how I engage in non-art communities and other collaborations with other artists to interpret living archives. So first of all, I'll just kind of give you a background because I travel all over the world now with my practice. And when I'm talking about Ireland, I have to kind of give a kind of a speed dating history of Ireland when I travel. So I know some of you have been on the tours already, so you've seen the gorgeous Irish landscape, the rolling green hills, and these beautiful ancient 1,000-year-old stone walls. And this is the kind of Fáilte Ireland kind of message of Ireland that's presented. But also, during our boom years, we built these thousands and thousands of what have now been called ghost estates. And even though we're going through a massive housing crisis, we actually built the worst planned houses with no infrastructure all over the country. And currently there's 250,000 empty units like this all over them. And as a post-colonial country, we kind of lost our identity a bit when we tried to enshrine who we were when we got independence over 100 years ago. And we kind of looked a lot to this kind of American capitalist construct of in housing as a way of building a future for ourselves, knocking down a lot of our cultural heritage buildings along the way and doing untold damage to our vernacular heritage. But also we did have a problem that we did need to kind of build houses. And we kind of also swapped one colonist for another in terms of we got the Brits out and then we got the Catholic Church in. And that changed a lot of things around the way, in particular, women's bodies were controlled by the new state at the time. So a lot of my very early work was kind of a comment about bodily autonomy and the fact that even it's 2024 now, and in the Irish Constitution it says Article 42.3, a woman's place is in the home, and we just failed in ratifying to change that convention in our recent referendum. So I actually shouldn't even be here today, I should be in the home. Like most of you. I'm just going to show you some very early moving image work that kind of commented a little bit about this. So this is from 2007. It was actually shot in Clare, Galway, in one of the suburbs of Galway City. So this is called levitating. And for levitating, I spent, I know some of you are probably the TikTok generation and probably know how I made this happen. Does anybody know how it makes the optical illusion or the visual fiction of how it looks like I'm levitating 6 inches off the ground? Does anybody want to hazard a guess at how I did that? I'm jumping, thank you. Somebody used earlier audiences when I showed this work used to say Photoshop, and I'd be so horrified. But since the advent of like TikTok and apps on our phones and things like that, we now know that it's actually the physical or invisible labor of jumping was how I did that. So I spent 7 days going around the village of Clare, Galway, going 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3, jump, with a trolley and my partner Cathal pushing it around, trying to capture myself mid jump to create the optical illusion of movement. So this is how I started making films, when I wanted to kind of use a Brechtian hammer, or use the lens like a Brechtian hammer, to make a comment on these legacies of what we inherited in post-colonial Ireland. This is another film work that was called Possession, that was shot in one of these housing estates in Belclare. Okay, yes, I spent 7 days baking for this shoot. And as you can see, I just got up, moved the cakes along a little bit, took the photograph, moved the cakes along a little bit, took the photograph, and repeat and repeat and repeat. That's how my films are usually made. But like us women, we know this thing of invisible labor. So I was kind of commenting about, well, if your role is in the home, let's like totally use a Beckettian humor to comment about this. So this is how we women in the west of Ireland cut our lawns, by the way. We lay down on the grass, scissors in our hair. No, really, actually what I did do was I had a lawnmower off camera, had the remote control in my mouth, bit the remote control to take the photograph, thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs to make it look like I'm effortlessly chopping the lawn, moving the lawnmower in and out of the photo, so you never actually seen the lawnmower. So the film is called Possession, but I too was equally possessed in the making of the film. Oh, we don't actually have remote control garage doors like we'd like to have, but we still need our slice of bread in the morning. So this was just using remotes, 1, 2, 3, cut, get the bread knife in, cut the bread a little bit, one at a time, repeat, repeat, repeat. And I was using humor as a way of getting people to talk about much more darker subject matter. And I felt that was kind of important. But things started changing. Ireland, we're 50 years a part of the European Union, and it's been an incredible benefit to us. We've become the richest country in the European Union in the past few years. And one of the advantages is that under EU funding there is percent for art commissions, which means that 1% of every public infrastructure, a budget of that goes towards the commissioning of a public artwork. So just like my friend Alex Pentak and the Choctaw Indian sculpture that you see here on the placard here, that was a percent for art commission outside Mitchelstown. There were these 3 public art commissions that were going to happen in Mayo in the west of Ireland, in Northamptonshire in the UK when it was a part of the EU, and in Catalonia in northern Spain. And these 3 sites were the sites of former railway lines. So for one reason or another, they had failed. In Ireland, well, we went broke when we became a republic, so we couldn't keep our infrastructure going, so our railway lines failed. In Northamptonshire, the feckin' witch Thatcher made everybody unemployed. Yeah, thank you for that. giving us a huge depravity in Northern England, making everybody unemployed, and then voting for Brexit, thinking that it was foreigners were the reason for it. Actually, that in Catalonia, another evil person, Franco, blew up the railway lines during the Civil War. And the EU were investing in these former railway lines to turn them into greenways. Very early investment in turning in a new infrastructure, a green infrastructure. So 3 artists, Chevy Bayona, my Catalan friend, you recognize me in the middle, and Noah Rose from the UK, were invited to make temporary artworks. We put in a pitch to these former railway lines that were going to be converted into civic amenities, green railway lines. And so I was really interested in the idea of how the early railway lines were actually vehicles for emancipation of women. And I came across this really interesting academic who actually got cancelled in the 1890s. And she was actually from Boston originally. Her name was Lilias Campbell Davidson. And she wrote this book that got banned after its first edition called Hints to Lady Travellers. And in it she advocated the bicycle and the railway as objects to emancipate women and give them access to the world. Have you ever heard of her? Not many people have done, and this is marks a kind of a shift in my view of where I start looking at the gaps in the canon, where who actually gets to contribute to history and culture. And so I thought I'm going to bring Lilias Campbell Davidson back from the dead, and I'm going to get her to interpret these railway lines and this infrastructure in a new way. So this is the book. She was also, a bit like me, mad as a bag of cats. For example, this is one of her advice about how you should travel the railway lines when you need to bathe. And obviously women were not allowed to travel independently in the 1890s. So she gives an advice for how to deconstruct your domestic bathtub, turn it into a suitcase, empty out all your clothing, and have a bath in the middle of the railway carriage. I just thought, oh wow, what a woman after my own heart. So I propose to work with non-art communities in these locations to teach them stop motion animation, the techniques I'd perfected, and to also work with kind of feminist pioneers of the day. So this is a group of DIY punk feminists in Olot in Girona, near Girona and Catalonia on the top left. These are the descendants of the railway lines in Westport. These are teenage girls in a local secondary school. And we looked at the infrastructure in living archives. So we went to people who are keeping archives alive through volunteerism and through generosity. And we recreated scale models of the trains and the infrastructure of the time using cardboard, cotton wool and bicycles and whatever we could get our hands on. So this is a scale model of the train, and I'll just give an example of, then we take this out on the railway line and they direct me and I teach them how to use stop motion animation, and they make a film, a short, moving the train along the railway line, for example. In Northamptonshire, in the UK, in a town called Rushden, the railway drivers who'd all been sacked under Thatcher had actually pooled together their pensions and bought the station and turned it into a homebrew pub. And we're keeping the heritage of the whole area alive by keeping people employed, using the profits from the homebrew pub to buy up more railway line. And they basically gave me their entire railway line as a giant Hornby train set to play with my stop motion animations. They drove the trains, obviously I wasn't allowed to do that part. But okay, how do I go and disappear into the suitcase, or Lilias disappears into the suitcase? Does anybody know? Okay, I actually had a mannequin. I was much thinner back then, and I cut myself up. Climbed into the suitcase as far as I could go, stripped all my clothes off, dressed the mannequin up in my clothes, and then chopped it up 1 inch at a time. That's how I did it. And I was also looking at inventions that were evident in kind of archives of like early use for roller skates, which now people are using on the greenways, and I brought them into all of these little short films that we made. And then I proposed the use of these spaces as temporary installations. So this is a railway goods shed that the lads, the railway drivers, were saving up a whole load of money in Rushden. They wanted to buy it. The local Nazi Tory council wouldn't allow them to buy it. So I shamed the Tory council into allowing us to put a temporary installation in there of our films, and I shamed them at the opening address, and then the following September they got to buy the railway goods shed. So I'm a total troublemaker. You've no idea, I'm such a troublemaker. In Westport, at the back of a former Magdalen laundry, which goes out to the back of the railway line there, I found this lovely little chapel. I lowered the ceiling down, I put holes in it, and I made a small Hornby scale model of Clew Bay and the former railway lines, and in it were tiny little projectors that you could see the animations on. And I started with a book, and I felt it was really important that I actually imbued a book. So I made a limited edition 10,000 retreatment in 3 languages, in Berla, English, in Gaeilge, my language, and in Catalan. And we hid this book, this new interpretation of Lilias Campbell Davidson, in these railway geocaches, for all the nerds out there who know what geocaching is, like volunteer little libraries all along the railway lines in all 3 countries, and every school that was involved in the project. There was over 800 volunteers that made this project happen, and it was all temporary. I had to do something with the bathtub. How does the bathtub go in and out of the suitcase? Anybody want to hazard a guess? And somebody said I dig a hole. No, I didn't dig a hole. I actually had an angle grinder off camera, and I cut it off one bit at a time. I'm hardcore, I tell you. So it's a very funny trying to do this with a whole load of German tourists going by on bicycles, let me tell you. In Catalonia, though, I wanted to kind of celebrate the culture. And are there any Catalans here? Yes, there's some Catalans. So you know the festival Gigi Jans. So there's this incredible Catalan festival. They have the giants come out and they dance in September. And the giants in a lot are the oldest in Catalonia, the king and queen. And I got to meet the king and queen, and I also got to meet the last living train driver of the pre-Franco railway line. And I worked with the giant makers in the Museum La Garrocha, who keep the giants so well maintained and take it out to perform every day. And we made a scale model of the last living railway driver and made him a giant. So from now on, he goes out to dance with the giants every festival. They were very sweet. They actually named the giant after my son, who I was pregnant with, Nisha. So he has an Irish name, Nisha, and they gave him red hair and green eyes, which I thought was just so sweet. Anyway, I love that. They had to put a little bit of a Celtic flair on it. But I was asked to give a paper in a conference just like this on my work, where I co-create with all of these volunteers to make such a seismic work like Strange Terrain, which was the name of the project. So I was invited to Kaunas, first of all in Pest in Hungary, which had been the European capital of culture. And I was talking to an audience just like you, and in the audience were the curators from Kaunas 2022, which was going to be the European capital of culture in 2022. And they invited me to Kaunas to give the same paper, to talk about my work. And I was like, really embarrassed. I'd never heard of Kaunas. So I'm really apologetic now if there are any Lithuanians. Are there any Lithuanians in the audience? No? No. Anyway, my apologies. Anyway, I arrived there to give the paper, and I couldn't believe how feckin' beautiful the city was. It's absolutely extraordinary. The Lithuanians call it interwar modernism, this incredible city, European capital. And then I discovered this really tragic history. And what they asked me to do was, well, you make films, we have a budget of 170,000 euros, we want you to make a documentary. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm an artist, I don't do documentary, and it's not really appropriate for me to make something about your culture when I am not Lithuanian, I can't speak for your culture. We have to co-create it together. So they said, we can do that. You just make a proposal. So when I'd heard the history of Lithuania, I actually found there was so much post-colonial trauma that was symbiotic to my own country. So I'm going to give, for those of you who don't know, the speed dating history of Lithuania. My apologies. Lithuania got its independence after the fall of the Roman Empire. Its capital, they lost Vilnius in 1919. They did not have a capital, so they had to make a capital in Kaunas, which was like the Galway or the Cork city to their Dublin, and they had to build it overnight. So they sent all of their architects out to study under Corbusier, and they came back and they made this absolutely beautiful, what we would call Art Deco, they call interwar modernism. It's an absolutely beautiful architectural style. And the civic infrastructure is amazing, it's world class, but it all came to a crashing end when the Nazis invaded in 1939, and together with the Lithuanians, they killed almost all of their Jewish population, which were primarily the artists, the architects, and the drivers of the industry. And I thought this was very interesting. And then 4 years later, of course, the Soviets take over Lithuania again, and they call this period the occupation. And of course, anybody like you in the room who was left, sure, you would be sent on a train to Siberia, and that was the end. So, and then the Soviet machine moved in people from all over the USSR into Lithuania, and certain identities like language were banned. So you went from a very multicultural city to a city that was supposed to be Russian almost overnight. And I thought this was a very interesting thing. And I said, well, I think the way to start this is to look at something like Italiano Calvino's Invisible Cities, and to build a story, a series of shorts, where you tell me the history of what's in your architectural heritage. And I worked with this incredible writer called Sandra Bernadetta, and she found 50 volunteer short story writers, prose and poets, and they went to all these key locations of architectural spaces. Now, when Lithuania got its independence in 1991 and started looking to the future, it did what Ireland did. It got very wealthy again, but it started seeing these buildings as histories of trauma, so wanted to knock them down. So the team of Kaunas 2022 set me a task to get the Lithuanians, the Kaunasians, to fall back in love with their architecture, which was a huge ask. But I felt the only way to do it was to kind of show them through the use of the lens. So I started curating a series of early cinema events that were free and open to the public, of films that were made in that period and that style. And then I also told them about my story, that I'm from a working class background in Cork, and the way I saw filmmaking, or even the reason why I became an artist, is RTE was broke, and they brought in all these Eastern European or filmmakers from beyond the Iron Curtain to show on RTE, on the main broadcaster, to children, because they thought it was animation, so they thought these films were suitable for children, but they were actually politically oppressive films that were using surrealism to talk about oppression and censorship. So I saw Jan Svankmajer, Yuri Laka, Esther Krombakova as a kid. You couldn't show that to kids now, let me tell you. You'd be hauled in front of a social worker. But that became my exposure to the use of the film and to use of the lens. And together with other artists like William Kentridge, I started thinking about stop motion animation, and that would be the vehicle. So I brought their style, this beyond the Iron Curtain style, back to Lithuania. And I started showing them and started doing workshops. And the plan was to start working and start filming on the 2nd of March 2020. And we were on location. And then my brother, who's commandant in the Irish Army, rings me up and he says, get on the flight out of Lithuania now, because you are never going to get back into Ireland again for about 2 years. I went, why? And he said, I can't tell you, just come home. So I had to cancel filming. Of course, the pandemic hit. And I was like, feck, how in the hell am I going to make this film? So what I started to do was I started running this stop motion animation workshops via Zoom from my kitchen in Tipperary teaching people how to make stop motion animation via Zoom. So this is what the film here is called Ironing Board. And I was teaching this online. We were expecting maybe 150 volunteers. In each Zoom session, we had 800 to 900 people, because everybody had come to the end of their Netflix account. We were completely bored. Kids were homeschooled. They were like, go watch the animation workshop with the Irish artist. And it was just mad. And from those workshops, we started building the storyboards. And I started hearing these incredible stories from the writers about trans, non-binary protagonists, Jews, Muslims living together, LGBT communities, beautiful stories of what was inside in the architecture. And I thought, this is something we need to bring. So I started looking at all of this was the living archive. People were donating these stories, the living archive, telling me about George McCunas, who set up the Fluxus movement, was from Conus, about this banned film called The Devil's Bride, and how devils were that the Lithuanians were the last to convert to Catholicism, and how the devils were such an important part of their identity. And the stories of people of colour, people who saved people at times of great genocide and trauma, which is so important to what we are living through right now. So we converted all these stories into a script of shorts within shorts, of films within films, and each one is sewn together like an exquisite corpse. So I'm just going to show you the little short of the ambassador Sugihara, who saved 6,000 Jews from extermination by turning them into Japanese citizens. So this is played by Namasuko, who is a dancer of Aura Dance Theatre. What ended up happening was, I was expecting 150 volunteers. I got 1,000 volunteers that made this film with me, this feature film. And this is our Sugihara. And often we would kind of bend gender, so we'd have women or non-binary people playing one gender and swapping it out. Because at the same time that I was making this film, like everywhere in Europe, the rise of the right and the homophobia and transphobia was coming everywhere. And I just said, no, this is the part we use the lens now to comment about this sort of stuff. So this is one of the little shorts of the films. And we also documented parts of the pandemic in some of our protagonists. I mean, I had to do site visits via Zoom to some of these locations. It was just mad. We ended up having every school child in Lithuania was involved in the workshops. They all made their own stop motion animations. We were involved in all sorts of mad green screen workshops. I did screening programs of Oscar Schniedermeyer's Bauhaus Ballet online, and I asked people, when we only were allowed move from 2 kilometers, I said, go out and find your favorite building in Conus and turn it into a costume. We're going to have a paper ball online. So this is the drawings that came back, and then we all made these like stop motion animations where they directed me. Look at this beautiful building. This is from Albert Funk, who was a Jewish architect. This is a real building. So this is me being directed by a group of about 30, 14-year-old teenagers in school. They made all the sound Foley. I showed them how to do this all via Zoom. And they're directing me from my studio in Tipperary. And then, just to give you an idea, it's all using cardboard, all the materials we could get to hand. And then look at this. They then made their own costumes and made their own films. It was just so bloody gorgeous. But Conus 2022 were so blown away by these workshops. They said, would you design the costumes to be worn by our ballet company to be performed at the opening of the European Capital of Culture? And we said, okay, go on, we'll give it a shot. And that was performed to 4.5 million Europeans and broadcast on television. This is all our animations being projected and mapped on the building. Sorry, this is me in a stadium trying to film this. I should get the actual footage. These are all the kids' animations behind. And those are our costumes that were made from the Zoom workshops being worn by the ballet company. And then in downtown Conus, we video mapped all these beautiful modernist buildings with all the animations. And as I said, I'm from a working class background. So for me, it's really important to democratize the access to culture. Visual culture, heritage culture, all our cultures because it is too white and too middle class. And so I'm really, really adamant that we have to democratize the access. So I used to have this workshop where I was like, what is the one TV program that unites all classes of Lithuanians? And I was told, for an Irish person, this is kind of shocking. The Great British Bake Off. So I was like, okay. So I worked with these early school leavers, and when you leave school early in Lithuania, you have to learn a skill, so you learn how to bake. So they made the most feckin' beautiful modernist cakes, 6 cakes, which became these chapter points in the film. Like, isn't this just stunning? Like, the craftsmanship, the artistry, it's just amazing. But it kind of grew a leg of its own, because this one ended up in the Guinness Book of Records as the largest modernist cake ever made. I didn't even know there was a category. It's absolutely mad. Yeah. And we just became this viral hit overnight. It was absolutely mad. So these are just the cakes being demolished in front of green screen in the bakery. And also we partnered with other European capital of culture, because at the same time, poor Galway, bloody hell, it was the European capital of culture here. It was decimated. So together with Julian Dorgier, a local filmmaker here, we ran workshops in Super 8 filmmaking, and we gave the same premise of invisible cities and the exquisite corpse, and we shot, volunteer filmmakers came along and they shot their own Super 8 films in Conus, and it was screened both in Galway and in Conus at the same time, all interpreting their favourite modernist heritage bill. But I just want to show you, everyone here is a volunteer. Everyone here is the team from Conus 2022. They made this incredible film. All of these buildings were given to us for free. We had free access. It was just amazing. The film is non-verbal. It means, the film is called Clostus, which means pleats or folds, and it's about the way a story is held. But we worked with 3 local composers, one of which was only 18, to perform the architecture, record the architecture, be inspired by the architecture to make the sound foley. This is Yeva Balod, who's one of our local composers. She's only 18 and she made the most incredible piece of music. I'm just going to show you the trailer of the film. You could turn it up a little bit there. Oh, I don't know why that happened. Anyway, the film, if you're interested in seeing the film, it's still traveling. It traveled to all these film festivals all over the world. It is, and it was acquired by the National Collection at the Irish Museum of Modern Art last year. So it's in our national collection. And it went as far as the bid for Conus, who was going to get UNESCO World Heritage status. And I'm happy to tell you that last year they got UNESCO World Heritage status using the film as a background to that. So. Are you all right for me to talk about 2 other projects, or am I going on too much? You're not bored? Okay, right. Well, okay. So as I said, like I co-create work with people. I'm very interested in how democratizing the access to visual culture is actually really important to me. But I also am very interested in the voice of the proletariat, because I'm an unapologetic socialist as well. And I was approached by the Irish Traditional Music Archives, which is based in Dublin, and they are digitizing a lot of our archives. And in particular, they had just digitized this incredible guy, his work, his name was Edward Bunting. So I'm just going to give you the speed dating history of Irish colonialism as best I can in about 30 seconds. So we were colonized, 800 years of oppression. Our language was banned. Our music was banned. For example, Queen Elizabeth I, another feckin' bitch, she came along in the 15th century and outlawed the Irish harp. There's court records that said that Irish harpers were supposed to be strung up to the nearest tree by the very strings that they play. And they went from being ubiquitous, like our soothsayers, our elders, our chieftains, our bardic poets that carried on the language. They went from being ubiquitous everywhere, all over Ireland, to by 1796 there were only 11 harpers left. And they were all in their 60s and they were about to die. And then this incredible teenager called Edward Bunting, who was a Protestant musicologist, 19, decided to write down the last remaining lilts and airs in Irish harp from those 11 harpers. A living archive. People are an archive. And what he did was the most incredible, generous gift to us as Irish people. He saved the Irish harp from oblivion. And had he not done it, it would have disappeared. And I was so blown away by this endeavour. But I was also kind of more aware, or more keenly aware, that I think we are the last of the artists. And what do you do if you are the last of the artists? We've heard this earlier on, even from our Indigenous Northwest speakers, Northwest American speakers. What do you do when you are the last of the artists? How do you reclaim your Indigenous identity? And I just wanted to show you, this is where I live in Tipperary. This is in the side of the Silvermine Mountains. And one of the other things that we did when we got our independence is we also gave away all of our mineral wealth to massive multinationals. So in the 80s, we invited a Canadian mining firm into the silver mines, and they strip mined our area, and they made this massive damage where our water table is completely poisoned. There's arsenic all over the place. We can't grow vegetables on our land. All the animals nearby have to be destroyed. The EU had to bring in 300 trillion metric tons of topsoil on this area here to stop the arsenic blowing around and killing people. And I was thinking, God, this is really mad. You know, like this is what Bunting is facing, is the macro and the micro, where we are destroying the planet, and we could be the last because of our recklessness and because of intersectional pressures. So I started looking at the history and heritage of the Irish harpers, what they looked like. So first of all, this is what an Irish harper would have looked like. A bit like Cardi B or Little Nas X. They would have grown their nails really long to pluck the wire harps. They were very unusual people. So I thought this is very interesting. I'm going to bring this to some working class artists to interpret. But what I'm also very interested in is how we in Ireland are using our maritime climate to house data centres, and we're wrecking our carbon footprint by giving over all of these data centres our electricity and pushing our carbon footprint right over the grid. And artists too are contributing to that. So I approached an Irish harpist called Aisling Lyons from County Clare, and another contemporary Bunting. So this is Reet, who is an Inuit throat singer from Pangerton up in the Arctic, in the Canadian Arctic North. She's actually my first cousin by marriage. And she is bringing back Inuit throat singing, which had been banned by the Canadian authorities. Our previous speakers can probably vouch for this, up until 1986. Not 1886, 1986. And she's bringing it back through pop music. So she's using her traditions that she's learned from her mother and her foremothers to bring Inuit throat singing back through popular culture. I thought this is so interesting. So she's just won a Juno Award. She works at Tanya Tagak. She's just an incredible singer. And she had said that she'd love to collaborate with me. And I was like, well, do you feel like you're the last of the artist? And she said, yes, I do. So I said, well, this is what I'm interested in, is looking at how could we make something that could enter a number of different discourses. So we took the music, we worked with also a milliner called Margaret O'Connor, because actually the Irish harpers used to wear these crowns when they would travel around. So we kind of used a lot of the staging or the way the harpers would look to create this 4-channel multi-screen video installation called Oblivion, Shock Maltupt, which is my language, and Isi Mayon Insit My Qualutituk, which is the worst barbaric way of translating the Inuit version of Oblivion into this 3 language piece of music informed by Irish mythology, Inuit mythology, and we made this massive video installation that is still touring all over the world. So it is just finished on this massive outdoor screen in Dublin. Let me just show you.
Dana Asilvut.
And what we wanted to do was make a pop song, an apocalyptic pop song, so that both visual art, it could enter popular culture like a Trojan horse and talk about us being the last of the artists, using the motifs that are very pressing to our cultures. So it ended up being really kind of viral. The music actually got picked up, and we were invited to do a live performance and concert during the middle of the pandemic. So we did that. It was live broadcast on RTE, which is our national broadcaster. Reet came over from Pangerton. And we also pressed a limited edition vinyl record, and the proceeds of which are used to offset the entire carbon footprint, because myself and my partner, we bought land and we used the proceeds to offset the carbon footprint of the entire project by planting native tree species all over our land. And then it has just been picked up by Peter Gabriel, and he's going to tour it on his project and do a collaboration with me. So it's kind of entered into this popular cultural discourse, which I never really anticipated, and it's very interesting because that's how I ended up as an artist, really, is seeing his film Sledgehammer when I was a kid. And then it was really informed by the folk archives. And one of the things I was going to say was, like, I don't really like a lot of our forefathers that established the Republic, Eamon de Valera being one of them, but he did do one sound thing. In 1937, when he was President of Ireland, he set out to ask all 9-year-olds to go out and to interview the oldest citizens in their parishes or their villages, and to write down pishogue, folklore, stories, forgotten memories. And what was really amazing in 1937 was some of these kids ended up interviewing people who had survived the Irish famine. And actually, first of all, and you'll see the handwriting, all these books, by the way, are freely available on the duchas.ie, which is the folklore archives, which is run by University College Dublin. You can download it. First of all, it's amazing, the handwriting of 9-year-olds in 1937, right? Unbelievable. But also just that this is like, we're touching history, we're touching trauma here. And I was invited after doing Oblivion to go and do a big solo show in Salzburg in Austria. And Salzburg is the capital of opera in the world. And so I thought that one of the stories was this story. We used to have this tradition, in particular in the west of Ireland. I used to drive the Germans mad, right? Because when we joined the European Union, we got all this money to build the motorways, which some of you travelled in on into Galway. But we would never build them in straight lines like the Germans wanted us to do. We always built them around outcrops of what we called our fairy trees, which are actually hawthorn trees. And there's a particular tradition that when you gave birth, you took the afterbirth out of you and you put it onto the roots of these hawthorn and blackthorn trees. And some of the archives talk about this, in particular from the famine era. And the folklore is at certain points of the year, the trees bleed. There's a lovely motif. If we're the last of the artists, don't cut down the fucking trees, right? Or they're a part of us. They hold our DNA. They hold the lineage of all of our mothers and our grandmothers that went before us. And there's a story about this tree that sings to somebody who's going to cut them down. Don't cut me down. I'll poison you. And the guy cutting him the tree down gets a thorn in his hand. And sure, the next night he's dead. And then somebody goes out to finish the job, and the next night he dies of poisoning too. And I thought, this is such an operatic motif. So I'm going to stage an opera, The Song of the Bleeding Tree. So I worked with Joan O'Malley, an Irish soprano, and I translated the Irish into this operatic score and created this Song of the Bleeding Tree, which was shown in Salzburg as this installation. We're not hearing the audio here, but anyway, and I'm running out of time. And I was actually then just invited to show it in Lagos Photo, in Cotonou in Benin. And I've redone the entire song with an Igbo singer called Esosa Igedaro, because there's a similar tradition in Igbo culture in West Africa of placing the afterbirths onto trees, and trees become these sacred places. And that's what I've just been working on here. But opera has become a very interesting kind of subject to me. And one of the things that this is the last project I'm going to speak on because I'm just back from South Africa. One of the things that happened to me when I was commissioned by CONUS 2022 was they must have got the ranking of where I am in the world as an artist wrong, because the 4 commissioned artists were Yoko Ono, Marina Abramovich, William Kentridge, and me. But I was like, you don't know, I'm just small fry, really small fry. But I actually got to meet William Kentridge. He came along to my film and he was like, when are you coming to South Africa? We'll have to hang out. I was like, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. And I said, well, actually, there's a very interesting history relating to my surname, Barry, Cork, and South Africa. Are you aware of it? And he was like, no. And I said, have you ever heard of Dr. James Barry? And he was like, no. So speed dating history. I'll be really fast. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about, okay? The speed dating history of Dr. James Barry. Perfected the art of amputation on the Ukrainian battlefield during the war, the Crimean War. Performed the first ever recorded successful caesarean section on the continent of Africa. Opened up non-segregated medical schools in Cape Town and in Montreal. Had strict instructions that when he died, was from Cork, that's the most important thing, was from Cork, like myself. Had strict instructions when he died that he was to be buried in the clothes that he was buried in. And actually he had risen in the ranks as the highest ever decorated British surgeon, right? So the Brits loved him. The British forces absolutely loved him. But the strict instructions were, I'm to be buried in the clothes that I die in. But the feckin' maid ignored it and discovered that he had been born a woman. He was actually Mary Ann Bullocky from Cork, whose uncle was James Barry Sr., our Royal Academician painter, who was kicked out of the Royal Academy for being a Catholic during the Napoleonic Wars when there was sectarian hatred towards Catholics. And he gave over his identity to his niece in the late 18th century so that she could transition to become a leading surgeon and study medicine and change the face of modern medicine that we know today. And so I am now working with William Kentridge and trans and non-binary singers, Philip Miller, composer, Tseko Fatsumone, composer, Ibokwe and Messina, to create an opera film inspired by the life and work of James Barry. And I'm just after coming back from South Africa, working with these incredible trans and non-binary opera singers, creating the animations to tell the story of James Barry. And that's the last project that I'm working on. And watch this space for that. So that's coming out soon. Thank you so much.